You're listening to Future Artifacts FM, a bi-monthly podcast and broadcast featuring speculative fiction audio works by artists and writers, produced and presented by Nina Davies,
Rebecca Edwards,
and Niamh Schmidtke on RTM,
and also available wherever you get your podcasts.
The programme focuses on fictional works intended for broadcast to carve out a better understanding of the now by exploring various interpretations of the future.
Together with guests, we discuss the mechanics of different types of storytelling to reveal the complexities of contemporary culture. Let's get started.
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 This miniseries is commissioned by Henry Moore Institute to accompany their exhibition Phantasmagoria, Folkloric Sculpture for the Digital Age, open 15th May 2026 to 30th of August 2026.
For more information, just visit the Henry Moore Institute website.
Okay. Welcome back to Future Artifacts FM. As per usual, I'm your host, Nina Davies.
I'm Rebecca Edwards.
And I'm Niamh Schmidtke. Welcome to episode 36 and the second episode of our new mini-series, Phantasmagoria, Folkloric Sculpture for the Digital Age. It's a long title. And we're here today with our first artist commission of the new mini-series, Sahej Rahal. Welcome to the show, Sahej. How are you?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great. We're actually recording. We're recording this one remotely. We'll be recording most of these episodes remotely, as we have a very international group of artists for this mini-series, which is really exciting. You're speaking with us from Bombay.
Just to introduce you before we get into the conversation, Sahej Rahal is an artist and assistant professor of design media arts at UCLA. Rahal is primarily a storyteller. He creates counter-mythologies that interrogate narrations of the present. This myth world takes the shape of sculptures, performances, films, paintings, installations, video games, and AI simulation programs. Drawing upon folklore, prophecies, archaeological conspiracies, hidden histories, and occult manuscripts, he renders scenarios where the fictive and the real begin to converse at the borderlines of myth and memory. I feel like you're a pretty perfect starter artist for this series. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're sharing some sections from your work called Hallucination Stream, which is sort of a work in progress. But we're going to be sharing 3 sections of it, and we're going to be playing those 3 sections sort of throughout the episode rather than all together. So before we actually get into the work, I'm actually just going to go straight in with our first question before people listen to it. So to start things off, can you tell us a little bit about Hallucination Stream? Because the document kind of examines different forms of illusion by telling stories and provides specific settings before you kind of get into the story. And each section is also accompanied by an illusion axis diagram. We can share this document in the show notes for anyone who wants to read it. It kind of sits somewhere between a screenplay or a script, but then also something like a kind of academic methodology. So I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit where the desire for this study of illusion kind of came from, and maybe what it's sort of working towards.
Thank you, Nina. So Hallucination Stream was originally written for a book that Blaft Publications in Chennai published. It's called the Blaft Anthology of Anti-Caste Sci-Fi, SF. So speculative fiction. It's a collection of stories that sort of confront caste through, or interrogate caste through a speculative lens, through drawing from myth, sci-fi, reimagining stories that have or even urban legends around caste and how they've sort of materialized, on the everyday. So the stories that I shared as part of the anthology, Hallucination Stream, is essentially a collection of, I guess you could call them microfictions. They're kind of disjointed. They have a sort of whole to them, but they're essentially looking at how the kind of mythology, there's this kind of cosmic anatomy of caste that sort of the idea of caste or like the caste system itself sort of rests on and is then, kind of propagated. So unlike other forms of oppression, I guess you could say caste is premised solely on a myth, and it's a myth of this cosmic man at the center of the universe, and his kind of body and like his anatomy kind of gives rise to the caste hierarchy. So his head gives rise to the high caste Brahmins, and the further down you go, you get the lower castes. And essentially, what happens is people who do not belong to this cosmic hierarchy do not belong to society, and you see this kind of getting sort of taking concrete shape in the form of citizenship laws, and it's sort of becoming sort of a hyperstition essentially. It's this kind of made up story that becomes real. I just want to roll back on something I said. Other forms of bigotry aren't necessarily valid because they might have something like skin color or I don't know, sexual orientation attached to them. They're still narratives.
Yeah, but I think there can be a sense of them being backed up by some ridiculous or sort of fake forms of Enlightenment sciences to sort of qualify or validate the bigotry in question, whereas I think what's quite different about this is there isn't that same attempt, or that attempt is made through this kind of mythology or through this sort of folklore as you're sort of expanding upon in this text.
Yeah. To phrase it differently, I guess, there's a lot of hallucination and myth making that happens behind, other forms of bigotry, racism or but the lore behind caste is way more thicker, and you have fan fiction and things like that playing out, even now in Silicon Valley, for example. The idea behind it is the story is kind of told to you with these kind of gods and demons and epic narratives. So it's its own kind of that's where the, I guess, difference comes in, but they're all narratives at the end of the day. Where this goes is this text and these texts and some more that I've been writing will eventually enter this game that I've been working on called Distributed Mind Test, which you sort of encounter them as these kind of flashbacks and kind of diary entries and recordings that are sort of strewn across the world. The game itself is kind of exhausted of human life, and it's also kind of looking at how caste kind of became a global phenomenon as well when sort of globalization came to India, and how that sort of is one of the many kind of strange narratives of a glorious past that the right likes to stand on, and it's this fan fiction for as well. So it's kind of looking at these narratives and how they're sort of playing themselves out in the real world.
And in terms of the game, how will the game, or how do you envisage the game being played? Are you a person or a character in the game kind of navigating this world, or are you, I don't know, are you an illusion yourself, as the player?
Yeah, so the way the game, just to give you a brief idea for what it's all about, is you play as one of a three-legged kind of tiny creature that's kind of crystalline in shape, and you're wandering through different kinds of environments. The way the kind of central premise of the game is, it's a cooperative multiplayer game. The way it works is say all of us are playing together. So we have 4 controllers, and say I move forward and you move to the right, then the characters start shuffling diagonally, and then it has these abilities that you can perform, but depending on who presses what button, it kind of
So the players kind of almost become one body together.
Essentially, yeah, you're kind of this collective hive mind that's controlling the creature. One compliment I got for the game, I guess, was it's great for couples therapy. So yeah, you have to negotiate with whoever you're playing with, and then it's an exploration game, so you encounter other creatures and things like that. Yeah, I'll probably put out a demo soon. This gives me a little bit of a push, so thanks.
Okay, perfect.
So if it's a massively multiplayer online game, if there were 100 players, say, all in the game at once, would they all move together as a hive mind as well? So all 100 players moving through the world together, and what if I want to break off and explore something else? Do I get the chance to do that, or is it all about negotiation of groups?
Sorry, I should have mentioned, it's a couch co-op game, so there's no online multiplayer, so you're playing with someone right next to you.
I see. I mean, maybe that brings us quite nicely into the first reading, which will be the simulation section.
Okay, great. We'll play the first segment and we'll see you back in a couple of minutes.
Illusion type simulation. Location, Ruploka, the realm of forms. Time, Sushupti, when consciousness itself abandons the mind to roam the universe, the third state of sleep. The Hindi word for democracy is Ganatantra. Tantra signifies system, structure, machinery, contraption, and schematic. Gana, on the other hand, alludes to a group, gathering, troop, or flock of a highly particularized variety. In Hindu scripture, the Gana are the ghostly attendants of Shiva. Commanded by Shiva's elephantine son, Ganesha, whose name declares him the regents of ghosts, they descend from Mount Kailash to populate the state of sleep. Swatantra, the word for independence in Hindi, does not necessarily translate to freedom. Swa, in this assemblage, signifies the self. Yet, it is nowhere to be found. A being in absentia, premised on a matrix of non-dualist negations networked across Vedic scripture. The self is instead neti-neti, neither this nor that. A symptom of sensorial limitations and reactionary impulses, all bundled up in bags of meat and bone. Enacting such negations through mass incarceration, citizenship registers, and police action, the state of sleep dreams itself to be Sanatan, an exact simulacrum of time itself, eternal, absolute, and unmoving, denying entry to all manner of men that might try and trespass its slumber. Ghosts, however, are known to move differently. Illusion axis, state, slumber, citizen, spectre.
Okay, welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that. So Sahej, I'm going to jump straight into a question about that section that we just heard. So at the end of it, it says, ghosts, however, are known to move differently. And I'm really interested in the way that the ghosts are described throughout this hallucination stream. In another section in Spell, I'm really interested in the way that you describe these particular ghosts. So we've got Phasma, the ghost of sight, Paracusia, ghostly hearings, Phantosmia, ghosts that smell, Phantogasia, taste phantoms, which are often bitter and metallic. So all of these ghosts as being these kinds of sensory inputs that form the self. And even at the most basic level, maybe by this logic, our perception of self is glitchy and hallucinatory and riddled with these things that we can't quite grasp, these kinds of intangible elements. In that section as well, you state, or it stated, there's this pentagram of sense perception. And this is also something I wanted to note here. So these 5 senses are arranged like a system or a ritual structure, suggesting that the self is maybe something that's always in flux. So if the self is this fragile illusion built from these unreliable senses, does that make thinking or thought an illusion as well?
Right, unreliable. I have actually been thinking about like how this kind of messy process of cognition sort of occurs. And I came across this idea that like Aristotle actually speaks about. That cognition, he might be wrong, but he sort of placed cognition like the sparking of thought, that ignition, a point of contact where we, our bodies, come in contact with the world. And he places touch like higher than like whatever process is taking place in the mind. So for example, the contrary to how we see like you sort of touch, say, a hot glass of water, and then it sends a impulse to your brain, and then it sort of, your brain then cognizes it that this is hot. He's kind of inverting that, like he's saying you cognize it the moment you touch it, so on your fingertips. And another thing he says is that this faculty of touch, so all your other senses are receptive, right? Like you see, you hear, But then touch is kind of works both ways. It's this two-way highway, right? Like you can not only receive from the world, but you can also access it, intervene into it. Touch allows us this kind of mosaic of expression. Assertive, affectionate, aggressive, all at the same time, right? And then he goes further on to say that touch is not only fundamental to every sentient life form. It is also integral to our kind of not just sustenance but flourishing, for us to sort of be in the sort of whole, in our wholeness, in a certain way. So that's happening in Aristotle, and if you were to sort of compare it to Descartes, who says, I think, therefore I am, right? He sort of places thought before being, right? Where Aristotle would then say, I am because I feel, I feel my way through the world. And you find a very similar strain of thought in, the kind of middle path of Buddhism. So, there's this idea of Maya, right? Illusion, the world is an illusion and needs to be transcended. What the middle path says is Maya is essentially the illusion is the illusion of a perceived world, but a real world does exist, right? And this real world, the world of Maya, needs to be transgressed to the real world. And the real world is the one that you feel. And I don't mean this in some kind of esoteric way, that there's no kind
the
of...
one that you touch.
Yeah, literally. You know the world around you is real because you feel it on your body, right? You feel the heat or the cold or the rain on your body, or you feel the bodies around you through touch, right? Say your partner, when they embrace you, you feel the love they have for you, right? Immediately outside, before language, right? That sort of is felt bodily, right? That kind of allows us to sort of, escape that kind of realm of illusions.
One could almost maybe even argue that sight is also when light touches a surface. It's not even though it's not like a material touch, it's sort of still this contact that is made.
No, it's very material. In fact, the rays that touch your iris, it'll allow certain things to pass through and certain not, right? Same for sound, same for, your eardrums vibrating, and then, even with, taste, and smell, so it's all really touch, we're just
I'm wondering, where these ghosts exist, though. For example, ghosts that smell. I just think that's so wonderful. But where does that phantosmia exist?
My kitchen last week, honestly. I lost my father last year, and I'm kind of living in his house. So some nights when I come home, I can smell his aftershave.
So in that sense, there may be kind of lingering after effects of something. I'm thinking about the sort of taste phantoms. Actually, the smell phantoms. Smell is one of those senses that is very tied to memory, even more so than sight, I would argue. Walking into your old primary school, you instantly get transported to being a 6-year-old child because of that smell. So maybe these are ghosts that, they're not ghosts as we would maybe perceive them, but they're they're the aftermath of something. They're always there, but they kind of just come to us maybe through at different points in our life when we need them, maybe.
Yeah, so this particular smell, this ghostly smell or spectral kind of smell is one that doesn't really exist in the real world. It's sort of the memory of it is in your nostril, which is strange, right?
Have you read Catherine Hale's book on thought? Because she talks about the cognitive non-conscious. So that same thing of when you touch something, your body instantly starts cognizing that thing, and it operates. I can't remember. I think it's something 5 times faster than consciousness, basically. And so,
but I was going to say even that's also, not necessarily for humans. It's also a way in which we would react to, I'm thinking about this sense of smell also in terms of if you have a pet, a cat, for example, will recognize your scent, or a dog will sort of recognize the sound of your footsteps as you approach a door. That it's also a way that sort of, like, I'm thinking about these ghostly beings and this kind of role of mythology, but also something that kind of came across for me in thinking about ghosts is that role of the non-human, or potentially of the animalistic as well. And these, I think the interesting thing in Hales's work and Unthought is it becomes, cognition becomes a way of sort of drawing these connections between, let's say, the human brain, animal brain, digital infrastructures, and sort of plant life as well. And I wonder, that sort of feels like an interesting point in terms of your work, Sahej, because I think there's also this sense when you're talking about these mythologies and these kind of three sections that we're going to hear across the episode, there's a sense too of you drawing together specific places in time. Like, I'm thinking in particular the last section that you'll hear, and this role of kind of sculpture and world making also relies on these forms of sort of maybe ghostliness or cognition within not just the human brain, but all the beings that would inhabit the planet.
This is like, particularly with the game and these kind of AI simulations I've been working on, that's essentially what I'm trying to trace. Like, where does this capacity for thought take shape, and like how do we hold on to it? Like, not hold on to it, but like kind of render it in a form that we can like kind of discuss, Like, the game is literally, the elevator pitch for the game is like, getting people to think together and make friends at the end of the world, I guess. But the question it's asking is like, can thought happen in complete absence of another being? Like, can we have thought just by ourselves? Like, how I guess like Descartes says, like, I think, therefore I am. Like, I cognize the world, right? Like, it's very singular, and I don't think so. Like, even we're not, like, we are in isolation. We're always thinking with everything and everyone around us. Like, it's sort of shaping that faculty, right?
I guess also we're always thinking in context, kind of in relation to, the culture, the geography, the kind of, even like the gender in our bodies. We're always thinking through that context, whether we're kind of, it's immediately apparent to us or not. It's always impacting in some ways. They're all constructions, but ones that deeply affect how we will approach the world. Maybe that's a nice way to segue into our next question. And, I'm sort of opening up from this conversation about ghosts to kind of speaking more generally, I think, about your practice, but also linking it more closely to the exhibition at the Henry Moore Institute. And the thing that really struck me with this work is the ways in which you blend history, mythology, and digital media. Obviously we're reading excerpts of a text that, are almost like you're adding to the language of mythology, or sort of almost generating it in these ways. And I want to ask then, how does digital folklore operate as a tool in your practice? We're starting to talk about sort of roles of cognition, and as we kind of spoke about with Sean in the previous episode, folk can be anything, and I think here you're talking about it in quite a specific way. So if you could, talk a little bit about maybe some of the terms that you think about in your practice and how those operate as tools in maybe this work specifically, but also the game.
So I actually don't see a distinction between like I guess digital and like analog, right? Like, it's all like stories, right? Like, or taking shape. Like, storytelling is sort of like the first kind of like, I guess, technology that we had, like, as a civilization, like, or as a species, to kind of like, sort of kind of like carries us through and forward, and like, in whichever way, sort of like renders and articulates like, memory, history, all of it into something that can be carried forward. Like, that's how I sort of see folklore and storytelling generally. And like, video games are just like, one kind of aspect of it. I feel like, as is painting, as is like sculpture, as is like, poetry. It's all a big story.
And so when you think about digital folklore, or I guess I'm thinking kind of more specifically in the context of the themes of Phantasmagoria, is it a sense of you're just working with it in a contemporary age? These are the languages that we speak through now. Does that feel kind of part of where that interest in your practice comes from, in terms of, I guess I'm thinking of the sort of hive mind game infrastructure?
like, just to, like, kind of, I guess, push at that distinction, like, when we say digital, the idea is that, like, okay, something that kind of lies outside the realm of technology, right? Like, but then if you were to just for a second, like, kind of, think of a spot on your body, right, that isn't touched by the internet.
I would say there are no parts on my body that have not been touched by the internet, for sure. Like, yeah. Oh, that's your point.
Yeah, like, where does the digital end and then the, I guess, whatever came before it begin? Like, I mean, we see time collapsing in that way, and like space also collapsing with the internet. Like, I mean, I actually have a memory of a world without an internet, without a computer as well. But it's a very distant memory. Like,
I think for me, when I'm thinking about digital folklore in relation to specifically this piece of work, this hallucination stream, there's one of the time sort of markers for one of the illusions, nightmare. It says that the time that exists in is the shortest instant of recorded time. And to me, that feels very much in line with what we're talking about when we're talking about digital folklore. Because to me, a part of digital folklore is a kind of meme practice, or it's a kind of like a Reddit thread discussing something that's trending, or it's, all of these sort of small things that become embedded within a larger language of folklore that spreads on the internet. So I'm thinking about what it means to have this shortest instant of recorded time, and that maybe digital folklore in this instance is just a bunch of like short instants of recorded time that kind of solidify themselves and then expand. But yeah, there's definitely something in there that relates to that for me.
Yeah, so like, what you're speaking about, or kalpa. So essentially it's time measured by thought, So, and like, when you kind of read the epics, like, the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, you have like vessels moving at the speed of thought, or arrows flying at the speed of thought.
Is that meant to be faster than the speed of light, or?
Yeah, because thought happens before light, right? Like, but it's also like, a word used to describe the passing of eons, like, ages have unfolded in that kind of thought. This kind of, sort of comparable to another, like, idea that like everything that's unfolding in front of us right now, time itself is this like kind of instant that like, is just stretched out, like this thought that's kind of like stretched out and is being kind of segregated so that we don't lose our minds, I guess. Like, and so we rent time in order to not like get like subsumed by this like, instant. I mean, whether it's really how time unfolds or not is like anyone's guess, this is the way we're experiencing it. That's what's important. But like, I love these like kind of wild sort of speculations that like, you find in like, in Vedic scripture and like, that there's a gesture beneath them, which I do think kind of like removes you from the present. You know what I mean? Like there's this idea that like, what you are experiencing right now is not you, and your like, kind of what you feel on your body is not really what the real world is. So it's kind of this strange kind of like, transcendental idea that's sold, because that can be extended in all sorts of violent ways as well, right? Like, when none of this is real, then like it is of no consequence, right? Like, so you can do what you wish with it. So it does get extended in some like strange ways, but just as a kind of, wild sort of speculation, it's deeply fascinating. And you find different shapes and forms that this thing is being given to, like you have the idea of Shanbhangur, which is like, the universe was created and kind of like dissolved in like a single instant. And then you have the idea of the Mahapralaya, which is literally the mega apocalypse, like when all things shall finally end. But then you have Nitya Pralaya, which is like, this kind of slow dissolution towards the end. Everything is sort of receding back into some kind of primordial form that we came from. So, and that, they all kind of like contravene each other, contradict each other. So, like, it's occupying a cosmology of timelines.
think that's quite a good segue into the next segment that we're going to listen to, the illusion type story, which is sort of a semi title of the segment. So we'll give that a listen, and we'll see you back in 5 minutes.
Illusion type story. Location Unakoti. A rock-cut stairway to heaven sculpted with the faces of 9,999,999 divine entities that will be allowed entry into the hereafter, the only absent face being that of the human. Time Subh-e-Azal, the dawn before the beginning of recorded time. Unlike the idols they carve, sculptors are cut with a raw deal across Vedic scripture. Twastra, the first sculptor, was once known as Vishwarupak, or world shaper. He was the architect among the old gods, holding equal rank among Varuna, who was both ocean and sky, Agni, who was fire, and Mitra, who was both the promise and the keeper of its bond, and Soma, who was intoxication. Twastra himself was a master of many arts. He carved rocks, embedding them with unformed jewelry. He terraformed entire planets, as well as the nether realms beneath them, by lowering lakes and raising mountain ranges. He planted the forests, washed the valleys, and sanded down the deserts. This world that Twastra shaped was governed by an economy of gifts, for he had many more presents to offer. He gave Kali her tongue and Shakti her strength. To Shiva, he gave a third eye that would remain closed until the sleep of time. And to Indra, he gave 1,000 eyes to watch over its waking. To the humans that roamed the world, he gave heft, haught, hilarity, heavy-handedness, and humility, sculpting spirit upon the entire species in equal share. These gifts and the sheer skill of their craftsmanship inflamed the envies of Vishnu, the preserver, who was soon to be tasked with the upkeep of these offerings. Roused by resentment, a critic was born. Vishnu launched a smear campaign upon the creations of the world shaper. Twastra's designs, he said, came with defects. His giraffes gave birth standing upright, dropping their offspring from a height of 2 whole meters. Flightless birds carried wings, blind snakes bore eyes, and male mammals came with nipples. This collection of complaints condemned all of creation, reprimanding it to remain forever flawed, a civilizational curse that has since followed every sculptor bold enough to pick up a hammer. Illusion axis. Shape, shift, risk, mistake.
Okay, welcome back. That was the second of 3 segments of Hallucination Stream that we will be listening to in this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. We all hope you enjoyed it. To get back into the conversation, I mean, this segment, looking at story as a form of illusion, it obviously really resonates with the themes of sculpture, which we're looking at in this mini-series. And so I'm kind of interested in this relationship that you propose between the sculptor as a world shaper or creator and the critic as a condemner of kind of janky sort of creation. And I couldn't help but wonder whether there was something personal in this from you as a sculptor and as a storyteller. It really felt there was, when I finished reading that section, I couldn't help but think that there was really the mark of you as the writer of this in there. So yeah, I maybe just wanted to kind of ask you a little bit about that.
No, I don't think I'm the sculptor god. I'm not the world shaper. I am the one who is going to remind the world shaper who they truly are.
You're the one who's going to remind the world shaper of who they truly are.
Yes.
Okay. keep them in check in case their ego gets too big.
I mean, yeah. Like, I think they'll be able to deal with it. Like,
But I think there's obviously this, when you talk about with the game, you this sort of three-legged creature that you've made within the game. Obviously it's very much part of it, and you've also sort of you've created these sculptures that kind of almost you yourself have kind of mimicked this performance of the world shaper, making these sort of three-legged sculptures with defects. And then you sort of animate them. You kind of make these real world sculptures, and then you animate them in these sort of virtual worlds. So do you see yourself in this work as Twaster? I don't know if I've said that. I don't know if I've said that correctly.
Yeah, no. That's what's exciting about game design and programming and kind of actually struggling with all of it. It's this immense puzzle to solve. That idea of the world shaper. Okay, the reason I say that I'm the one who reminds the world shaper who they truly are, is because we all are, we all really are, all of us who decide to pick up the hammer, I guess, or create, in the most basic fundamental way, there's this idea in the Quran that we are the eyes and the hands and the ears and the mouth of God, of the Almighty. It's this beautiful line, where it says that this is the Almighty speaking, I was a hidden creature that desired to be seen, right? And that is why I created the creature, right? That's why I created the being that could somehow recognize me. And we're all kind of aspects of that kind of unfolding creation, right? And we have to kind of despite all the sort of ways in which we've siloed ourselves, find each other and one way of doing that is by creating, right? We're all the world shaper.
Well, yeah, I wanted to ask about those defaults, because I think this is something that all artists kind of encounter, right? In fact, anybody that is creative will encounter this kind of wrath of maybe, or this envy of Vishnu maybe, who he's roused by resentment, and so he kind of he lands this smear campaign up on the world, and it just makes me think of the ways in which the art is critiqued, or these sort of defaults that I would actually call very interesting and intriguing parts of work, how these are kind of laid bare and really picked apart. And I think you make this very obvious in the text, this idea that the giraffes give birth dropping their offspring from 2 meters and these kinds of things. And at the end, you're saying that this sort of collection of complaints condemned all of creation. So actually, to create is not without its criticisms, and maybe that is a good thing, right? I think this feels like what you're trying to say. And also then to come back to your game making, the illusion axis of this feels very relevant. The shaping, the shifting, there's an element of risk in there, and there's also these mistakes. So it feels like you're kind of giving us this manifesto for creation almost. It's great, go do your creating, but also be aware that these things are going to be criticized, because to create is a very potentially privileged position. It seems to be, from what this text is kind of saying, the way that he sands down the deserts and washes the valleys, I'm just imagining this incredibly powerful, massive hand just coming down and with his sandpaper just sanding the Gobi Desert or something. But yeah.
I don't know if it's something that's privileged per se. It's just the world shaper shapes the world because that's what the world shaper does, It's sort of being that's what, if Agni is fire, then Vishwarupak is the one that shapes the world, So fire burns, that's all it has to do, right? So these ideas sort of embody these just these actions without the purpose is the action, in that sense. Whereas Vishnu particularly, and you see him throughout the many avatars that he kind of takes, ends up playing a very a kind of role where he's not really, that distinction between purpose and action is kind of very evident. He's sort of sometimes they're very contradictory as well. If you see his role in the Mahabharata, for example, there's this penultimate moment where Arjun, who's this archer, has this moment of crisis. So he's the greatest warrior ever. And the only thing that could stop him is an existential crisis. Why am I doing any of this? Why are we waging war? And at that moment, Krishna, Vishnu as Krishna is his charioteer, so stops mid-battle, and the entire battle also stops. And Vishnu starts narrating to him the law of karma, right? That you are a warrior, you need to perform. You are a weapon, essentially. That's what he's being told. And you do what weapons do. Now, here, you see, so what he narrates is actually the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, right? That's the story of where the Gita actually came from. So, here, you see, Vishnu performing a very another form of intelligence, which is cunning, right? Where he is driving men's passions towards certain ends. You know what I mean? In fact, there's this other story that when Vishnu came in his previous avatar as Ram, who was very benevolent and image of goodness, so to speak. There was too much good in the world that he brought. So he had to come back as Krishna, as the kind of naughty, cunning, conniving.
The troublemaker.
Yeah, the troublemaker. Yeah. And if you look at Krishna's stories, there's quite a lot of trouble that he kind of rise up. But then that's Vishnu, and so you see the figure of the critic in that. This entire, how do we deal with criticism is always a tough one, right? One thing that I found, say for example, something your work is derivative, someone's going to, it reminds me of this stuff. When you look at game designers or programmers, you tell someone hey, I read through your code and I found it fantastic and I just stole it. I took these bits that you left on GitHub 7 years back, and they'll be oh my god, thank you. Someone actually read that.
Yeah, in the game world, I feel that kind of thing it operates on a very different level. People are very happy to share, and they're very happy for you to use their systems and their storylines even. Yeah, there's a much different level of creation there, I guess. It's more focused on collaboration in some ways.
So that's programmers, but you'll see that with cooks as well. You'll see that with engineers in general. People who make things like sharing those,
Well, I guess being able to quoting each other or referencing each other. I'm thinking because we just wrapped a mini series about collaboration, and one of the things we were talking about was the types of social infrastructures that kind of artists require, and part of it is that sense of kind of who are the peers that you surround yourself with, which is also things like who are you quoting back to one another, what are your shared points of reference, which I think for many of us is also where do you share points of critique of one another's works, kind of visiting your peers' works and sort of making critique on that, and that not that necessarily being a negative thing, but more kind of the points at which you're able to have the discussion. The critique isn't it's bad. The critique is how do we discuss and create these kind of maybe shared moments of knowledge, or even this cognition that you're talking about. How do we kind of come to the point of bringing our knowledge together, or bringing our cognition to a point where we can, I'm thinking of this three-legged creature in the game, move in the same direction.
Yeah, in fact, if you think of the entire endeavor of art as this game, that we're all playing, right? Which doesn't really have any losers, right? The only way the game is played is by continuing the game. You add another fold to the round, in a certain way, and turn it, change it a little bit, that's the only way to play it. If you start seeing it that way, then it's, as opposed to this kind of individualized kind of thing that it's not the Olympics, right? It's not. It is this collective endeavor that we are all kind of enmeshed in, really. Something fundamental to what we are as human beings, right? I guess the game would only like kind of grow if we have more artists, like kind of like, everyone, not in that like, kind of cookie cutter way of like everyone's an artist, but like we create like without that distinction, that like particularly the idea of the contemporary sort of like, silos art. This is how art has continued since like the beginning of time, right? Like, it is this and then but then it's sort of cut away from like this flow of like, just daily life. And then you have sort of narratives about like, art changing the world, and like, art as activism, art as, art hyphen another thing. Like, and those are things that art possibly cannot do. Like, especially if you see the way that the world's unfolding today, it's where we find ourselves in these like forever wars and like in the state of like, collapse on like, every front. Art was never really meant to like, kind of like fix these. But it's more about like, and this is something my brother Harmeet, it like kind of reminds me time and time again that like, it's about like kind of being through that, like, like kind of being through the kind of pain and the like, the long nights and the dark nights of the soul, like, and kind of sharing space through those, hoping that we make it through, and if not, like, at least we have the poems. Right?
So we're gonna use that as a moment to go into our third and final segment of Hallucination Stream. This is Illusion Axis Rumour. See you back in a few minutes.
Illusion type Rumour. Location Ayodhya, the place that shall carry no conflict, one among the many terrestrial birthsites of Lord Ram. Time Sham-e-Abad, the evening after oblivion, the end of entropic time, 1992. In the aftermath of the Cold War, as Western society began celebrating history's end with all the carbonated jubilation of a well-shaken Coca-Cola, cable television arrived in India. With it, myth finally returned to the land of the living. Yet, the silent perturbations that led to this untimely return began even further back in time, in the year 1949. 2 years into the greatest experiment in democracy the world has ever known, the people of India found themselves in a nation divided by the communal shibboleth of the partition. Prime Minister Nehru was grappling with the founding idealism upon which the nation itself had been imagined, while his second-in-command, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, struggled to hold its precarious contours together. The India that was born, as Nehru declared at the stroke of the midnight hour, was about to witness a collapse of myth, memory, and history, spiraling into the abyss of fundamentalism at 3 a.m. On that darkest of nights, the newborn nation was met with ancient ghosts from the Mughal Empire. In 1526, Commander Mir Baki oversaw the construction of the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya, a Muslim shrine to honor Emperor Babur, the forerunner of the Mughal dynasty. Subsequently, a rumor began to grow that the mosque was built upon the sacred birth ground of Ram himself. 4 centuries later, Ram, the 7th incarnation of the god Vishnu, would return to his birthplace. On 23rd December 1949, a Muslim policeman named Havaldar Abdul Barkat brought this godly return into the legal record by filing an FIR, First Information Report, claiming that he saw a flash of lightning, following which he caught a glimpse of an infant child locked inside the Babri Masjid. The alleged child soon vanished, leaving behind an idol of Ram in its place. This apparition mobilized the far-right forces of Hindutva, and in December of 1992, the mobs demolished the Babri Masjid in an effort to reclaim the mythical birthplace of Ram. The child who appeared in a flash of lightning was proclaimed to be Ram Lala Virajman, the infant deity who would become chief litigant in the most divisive property dispute in human history. Illusion Axis. Man takes, land makes, temple takes, land breaks man.
So welcome back again. We really hope you enjoyed that third and final instalment of Hallucination Stream by Sahej Rahal. Sahej, I kind of want to move on a little bit to the language in this speculative fiction. You are obviously using this as a storytelling tool. And here, for us, I think you're applying the language of these national legends to discuss political figures from our recent past. I've seen Trump is mentioned in there, among others. How does this kind of mythologizing affect our perception of these events or of these figures when we draw analogies between politicians and deities? Because it feels quite slippery, but yeah, I'm interested.
So, like, this idea of, like, mythologizing political figures has been, like, that's fundamental to power, because power requires a narrative and it requires a performance, Like, power it only exists in its performance, really. Like, this idea that, like, power is something that, like, you can actually have is, like, it's meaningless, Like, it's always power on over, the other, right? Like, getting someone or something to do what you will. But then that's all there is to it, and because it's so hollow by its very nature, it requires, like, an exterior narrative to sort of verify and solidify and ratify it. So you'll have mythologies of, like, these gods and, like, these kind of chosen figures, right? And then there's ideas that, like, hey, like, even if we don't look at the myths, like, say for example, like, engineers, like, they're already, like, high up on the sort of, especially in India, like, if you're an engineer, like, you're way high up on the sort of social hierarchy, sort of seen as this, like, because you're far more intelligent than, like, the rest of us, sort of. But that's not true. Like, look at what's happening in Silicon Valley, or, like, what tech bros are trying to sell us. It's completely, like, almost like completely separated from, like, just everyday reality. In India, like, one of the really funny example is, like, there's this app called BetterHalf.ai, which is a matchmaking app, and the algorithm pairs you. So the way it works is, like, you put your CV onto it, and, like, it pairs you with people who kind of fit your pay grade and things like that, like, and the marketing around it is, like, it's pairing people based on similar value systems, right? Like, where I'm going with this is, like, essentially, power is nothing but a sort of fear response to the kind of uncertainty and the kind of insecurity that the world at large sort of throws at us. This kind of, like, overwhelming sense of being, and on a very fundamental level, like, not knowing if you're, like, kind of what you're experiencing is yours alone, or, like, are you sharing this reality? Like, I do feel like it's a primal kind of, it's a response to a very primal fear of, like, finding yourself alone in the universe.
So would you say that you're sort of being sort of sympathetic to these characters in your writing, or?
I mean, I don't know about sympathy, but, like, and not just these characters, but, like, so I was watching the Manosphere documentary, like, and
oh yeah.
I mean, it's funny, but, like, after a point, you're just, like, feeling terrible for, like, not just the guys on screen, like, but, like, and their audiences, like, because they're just in the absence of, like, someone just maybe giving them a hug when they needed one, like, have decided to come up with these strange kind of, multi-level marketing schemes and all of that.
Everyone's just afraid.
Yeah.
But I think there's something kind of disarming of their power in saying that as well. It's sort of like recognizing, oh, your desire for this doesn't make you more or less masculine. Your desire for this just demonstrates how alone or how afraid or how much maybe you didn't receive love that you should have or wanted to receive when at a certain age. Like, it's sort of, but that also feels like when you have someone who's being aggressive towards you, it's, like, quite disarming to say, oh, that aggression is not about me, that's a reflection of you. And that's kind of what you're saying in terms of maybe that type of sympathy becomes a disarming of that structure by reflecting it back on the person who's trying to enact the power. Like, I think it's interesting when you had this point in particularly US politics where they tried to disarm Trump's politics by saying, oh, I feel so bad that he doesn't understand this. Like, this is really upsetting. and that type of politics can also be kind of dismissive to the very real harm that his policies are enacting. But it starts to become a way to sort of like shift the language back, or like kind of, if the language that we've usually been using to describe politics is sort of is becoming redundant, as it feels like it is now. It's sort of, I think part of what this project is doing is trying to find how do we think of like different points of language at which these discussions might have the sympathy which you're describing.
I mean, I see this idea of power and like, the separation that it sort of creates between human beings as like the fundamental sort of rupture where this entire thing sort of springs from. The moment that sort of separation happens, you'll find it in your everyday. I mean, we don't even need to look at geopolitics. Like the moment you find yourself in a place where you're kind of separated from another human being, and these separations are sort of like there's something very fundamental to the way like they're kind of built into language, in the way that like we articulate ourselves, the way that like we cognize ourselves. Like I mean, like this is not to give like anyone a free pass or whatever, but like if you were to really think about like where does power, like where that violence sort of stem from, that darkness or whatever you call it, like I mean, we're all harboring it, like at the end that's something we need to confront. Like I mean the kind of immensity of the human experience is this, like the fact that like we are capable of like absolute beauty and absolute horror, like that's unfolding in front of us today. So we are as much a shape of it as and that's kind of a darker idea to think about, like in the sense like we are by just our very being enacting violences as well. I do think really that art can kind of get us through this impasse that like that the human experience sort of has endemic to it. Like art is that one faculty that allows us to kind of reach out literally, like I mean in the most like mushy way possible, I guess. Like there is that, like it is capable of reaching that impasse. So I like I have immense faith in that idea, and like I do think that it's not over yet.
No,
I agree.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sahej. We're going to put your website and stuff in our show notes, and please let us know when the game is demo ready, because I know we would all love to play it, but yeah, let us know.
Yeah, and and we'll put the texts in if you're happy, Sahej, for us to put it in the show notes so that listeners can either read along as they listen to it, if they want to listen to it a second time, and or if they want to do further reading after listening to the episode. And I guess on that note as well, do you have anything coming up in the future that you'd like people to kind of direct people to? Any plugs you want to make? I'm
going to be starting at UCLA soon, so I'm really excited about that. I have a show that's opening in July in Soonspeak as part of the sculpture exhibition in Netherlands. And one more thing I do want to plug. I have a starter project that I've made in Unreal, which is on my Instagram page, and I made a tutorial for it as well. And I'll share a link with you, so you can if you'd like to share it with the show. I've used it to make like literally everything I've made with Unreal so far, and I've tried to like design the project in a way that people who have never coded before can use it after watching a few tutorials. Like one tutorial is like a 10-minute video that I made.
Amazing.
So everyone can become a world shaper.
Yeah.
Themselves.
Yeah.
So everyone can become their own digital sculptor.
That's great. That's great, Sahej. That's really great to offer that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, we'll see everybody in our next episode, but thanks so much for listening.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.